Did you guys get the website?
Hello? Hello? Everyone, can you hear me? Yes? No? Not at all?
Yes.
Too loud?
If you need name tags still, we're just putting them right here, so come and get them and then sit back down.
Okay. Is it good?
Yeah, sounds great.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. Hi,
Morning.
morning. More energy. More bananas. Hi. Okay, thank you for coming to Design for History event and very welcome to you. Today's morning is packed and so we requested you to come on time. I know parking is a little bit confusing and some people are still coming in, but we will go ahead and start. Okay, so Design for Christian event, I should, when people hear about this event, then they have different perceptions. What is design? Because design is a broad category, and many people do not understand what it's about. So we will try to explain a little bit, and if you have any questions, you can always ask. And we'll see how the activities. This is an instructor-led event, and if you are interested to form your own teams, let us know. So let's go about it. Give me 1 second. So you ready? So introduction to DFS 2020. Few things. It's a 2 days design-a-thon. We have used the word for hackathon to design-a-thon. It's because we are going to be designing a solution today. You can do a coding for something new prototyping, but not necessarily. The focus is to understand the context and to design a solution. So what are we designing today? There will be a focused issue given to all of us, and we will try to take stab on that single issue, right? Many people said they don't understand what design process is. This event is for you because it's going to be. You can always learn from others, and there will be a session for that. Experts, you can help out the people sitting next to you, share your knowledge. Again, as I said, it is activity-based event, so throughout the day, today and tomorrow, we will have certain instructions, and people can form groups and they can work on those activities. As I said, expert track, there are some teams who said that, am I listening to a so they can form their own teams and we will let them work on their own teams. We'll not talk just to give a context, our theme this year is Vision Zero. And if you have not heard of it, this word you will be hearing a lot of it in next 1 or 2 days. But it's about the commitment of the week that we have to end traffic-related deaths and serious injuries by 2030. I did not get it. Okay, sorry about that. Um, okay, so why do we do that for instant event? We do it because we want to spread that mindset. We want people in the city to come and solve problems together because we know what the problem is and we want to we will be able to find the right solutions. So the whole point is bringing people together to work on issues that matters to citizens, that matters to us. And this started, design is what has not been very popular in Houston. There are a lot of things Houston is popular about, but design is coming slowly and it's coming big. And so in River of History 2018 and 19, we came together with the concept of doing design. Design for Houston, he was, Giddy and I, is a design community and City of Houston. We thought that picking one problem and going through the whole process of solving it will help people to understand the design process. And this year, we have a lot more design communities. We have Not History, we have Oxford, we have AIGA joining us in this event. So there are more design communities coming to this event, and this is going to be one of the events that we would like to attend. To help with the activities today and tomorrow, I'm not sure what is happening there, but bear with me. We have some of the SMEs, industry SMEs that will be working with us, some of the city experts. But there are a few names that I want to clearly mention. So because you are going to seeing them, talking to them a lot, and so it's good for you to know them. Jesse Brown, he's very similar, and he will be talking to us. He's also so listening. He is director of innovation of City of Houston, and he would help us to understand how city works and what that is. Summer Reeves, she is heading the innovation hub of Accenture, and she has over 12 years of experience in digital product design, with a heavy focus in design thinking methods and user experience practices. So she is our design thinking expert in today's session. Williams, she is the director and lead facilitator of collaboratorium at West Houston Institute, Houston Community College. So she is our second SME, and I will be hosting the event. I'm the founder of Design Thinking Innovation. Yes. Okay. So and again, we are expecting one more SME who would represent the Vision Zero Secretariat. He has done a lot of work. I'm not sure where is not in yet, but he will soon be promised that he will be on the today. So he has worked in Vision Zero for a long time in different cities in Texas, and he's fighting very hard for the cause, and he would be our expert today. Uh, so, since this event is a public event and we keep it open to everyone to join, there are sponsors who help us to get this going, and I want to thank them. Just 5 minutes on that. History is so chill. They have let us use this space, this awesome space, and so I just want to say that few things about them. They are non-profit organizations created to accelerate growth of this innovation ecosystem, and they support strategic initiatives that are connecting, attracting, and promoting startups, investors, and corporations. Uh, they have offices here and a lot of job openings. In case people are looking for jobs, they can go to their website. Uh, yes, so that's what I can say about that. I would call Ravi to speak about Empowerment. They have sponsored a group this time, so I'll just let Ravi to speak about it.
Hi everyone, good morning. So the lunch sponsor is University of St. Thomas, but it's also through the McNair Foundation. You will find this flyer around. It's for a bold ideas pitch competition, which is offering up to $30,000 in cash prizes for great ideas that can truly innovate and change our community, make positive impact, as well as make good, viable business sense. So any one of you that want to work on ideas today, want to pursue with either St. Thomas or HBU or Houston Community College, all three of us are partnering together to offer this bold ideas pitch competition. And if you're not a current student, it's really easy to become a student of Houston Community College under our continuing education program, which primarily tends to be either free or it's very minimal price. So you become a student very fast to give yourself that seed funding from the McNair Foundation. It's not just the money, it's also the mentorship and the support you get. So St. Thomas, McNair Foundation, HBU, HCC, all of us are really proud of the work that's being done here, and we are happy to provide the food to give you the energy that y'all need to come up with some of the best ideas in the world, right here in Houston. So thank you.
Okay, so our next sponsor is Houston Bee Center. And isn't it obvious? This whole event is about you, and they were very happy to lend us the prize money. So, who has idea of when this time we are going to get annual membership for free? So, we have something good to go win the ideas today, this time. So, a little bit about Houston Bee Cycle. It's operated by Houston Bike Share, a local nonprofit started by the city of Houston, whose mission is to provide equitable access to bike share that fosters recreational mobility and personal wellness. They envision a Houston where everyone has access to bike for work, play, and transportation. So you can go and look their Bcycle app, and you can see where they are located. And our last sponsor, we have kept out the last and smaller things in the event, is Houston Community College. Jody seems to be busy. Maybe we can hear more about them. You want to give a little bit? Okay.
So the same spill, right?
Okay.
The three of us are working together. So absolutely, Houston Community College, again, continuing education programs, 140 programs and growing. Anything you want to learn from cybersecurity to designing to 3D fabrications. Check out Laura's space at our West Houston Institute called the Collaboratorium. We're really rebranding ourselves as a community college, and we're really trying to do a lot more for our community. So if you think about education, think about workforce, think about HCC. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move to the agenda. I know you are here early, and thank you for that because you want to give a little bit of time to do all the planning. So we will start with the introduction. I'll start with brief of designs, and then we will do the challenge and we'll talk more about the challenge. And today will be about synthesizing the issue that we're tackling. I know these are all technical words, many of you must not be understanding, but while we go through the activities, you will get to know. We will want to end the day, if possible, optimistically with creating a problem statement. And if people have energy left out, we will try to do an idea definition and prioritization also. Tomorrow will be mostly about prototyping and getting user feedback on your ideas, and then preparing for pitches, and at the end of the day, while presenting the ideas to the experts. A few do's and don'ts. It's a hackathon. Learning space, we share ideas. Team formation is open, but we will want you to mix up that your skill set with others. It's good to sit with your friends, but it's good to sit with people who are having different skill sets than you, so that your ideas can, yeah, go ahead.
What is an SME?
Subject matter expert.
Okay.
So, yeah, if you know a lot about city functionality, you are a city SME. If you know about design, then you are a design SME. So, likewise. Okay, so then we have some SMEs who are here, they will work across team. If you have any questions, you can reach out to them. And since this places given to us by our sponsors. Let's be respectful of the students. The front gate should never be kept open. It has to be locked all the time. So if you go out and in, please make sure that it is locked and clean up after you are done with the space. Yes. So, other things. So, how many of you know or know about the design thinking? Okay, around 50%. 50% of the hands. So good, other 50% does not have to worry because we will be going through step by step. And we wanted to start with getting into the problem first. But we will just give you a brief introduction so that you know what is happening. Okay, so design thinking is a process. I know in the afternoon we'll spend more time with that. But on a high level, it looks like diverging, converging, double tapping sort of process. Where we will take a context and we will extend our thoughts, ask more questions, try to understand what is happening. And then we will try to gather all that information and come up with a conclusion or one problem statement. And on that problem statement, we will go ahead and try to brainstorm as many ideas, go wide, and then again try to find one idea that might work, and then work on that to test and repeat test, and then present it to everyone. So over the period of today in the morning, we will have one problem statement challenge, design challenge. On basis of that, we will ask questions from the subject matter experts here. There will be a panel discussion wherein we will go and talk more about what we want to know from them. So they will have structured questions already prepared, and they will be talking about it. But you will get a chance, your team will get a chance to ask one or two questions. So once the panel discussion starts, please start taking notes and then come up with questions that you want to ask. So this whole inspiration phase is what is planned for the morning today. After lunch we will start with the synthesis. But in the morning, let's try to understand what vision zero is about. So this will start, and I'll just start with a few statements, and then I'll hand it over to subject matter experts who will give you more details on it. So vision zero, something looks like this. Now what are these? In last 3 years, starting 2017 till today, 2020, there has been 4,267 crashes, containing 8,905 vehicles involved in and impacting 11,995 personal lives. So this is the map of that. And you can see this map, there is a data shared on the shared folder that has been shared with everyone. You can see this data. Vision zero is about not accepting this fact. It's because it is unacceptable to have a destruction of life on the road that we have designed to travel. It is unacceptable to see this. This is something that we can control. And we should be able to solve this problem. There should not be lives lost on the road. And that is what we are trying to solve today in today's problem. I would like Jesse to give more insights on this.
Yeah, there it is. Hey, so I'm Jesse Bounds. Welcome, and y'all are in for a fun and intense weekend. It's going to be lots of fun. So I'm over the Office of Innovation in the Mayor's office, which, as Tim here mentioned, we're kind of overseeing we're the internal consulting group for the state. So we work with academia, with industry, with community members to solve city challenges, improve the citizen experience. And so that's what we're doing here today with you guys, is solving a really critical city challenge, which is our deadly roads here in Houston. So how many deaths on Houston roads are acceptable, would you say? Yeah, okay, so that's vision zero. And the mayor is, as of last year, signed on to the Vision Zero pledge, which is to eliminate traffic fatalities by 2030, which is super aggressive. You think of that and you're like, okay, well, how are we going to make that happen? There's a lot of stuff that we can control as a city. There's a lot of stuff that people can control just through their behaviors. But there's also a lot of things that we need to overcome as a city. And City Hall doesn't have all of the answers for how we're going to get to zero. We're going through a process right now where we have a task force that is made up of all of the regional stakeholders in transportation planning, metro, textile, others, and doing a lot of analysis into so we know where the accidents happen and how they happen more or less. We don't really know or have the data for why they are happening, and so we're starting to uncover the why. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to really better understand the drivers behind traffic fatalities and the like here in Houston. So we're kind of early in the process as a city in our Vision Zero task force. So we basically just established a task force back in September or October. We hope to have a plan by April to June timeframe, and we'll have some folks from the planning department who are leading Vision Zero effort to kind of guide you through where we are in the process and what they're looking at. There are some focus areas that we're really honed in on. One of them is pedestrian safety. So pedestrian accidents, there were actually just 2 yesterday where pedestrians were killed on Houston streets. One was walking across the East Freeway, and last night got hit by multiple cars, died immediately. And the other was, a guy who got hit over in Lockwood and Tidwell. And so these are just not acceptable, and we need to, and I just want to see a show of hands here today. How many of you have been personally impacted by traffic fatalities, either friends or family, or pretty much all of us. So this is why we're here today, and what we care about this so deeply. So the focus area that we're going to have today, am I going to talk about the common statement?
So I just want to show some statistics again. In the last 5 years, we have out of 19,766 personal lives, 1,762 citizens were killed or seriously injured. And why is the focus area? Because we have very less number of pedestrians that are getting impacted. Out of the overall accidents, most of the accidents happen through car accidents or something, or other reasons, but pedestrian is just 2%. But when they are hit, they are either deadly injured or they are killed. So the reason for people to die is more when it comes to pedestrians. And that is why we are choosing our focus to concentrate on pedestrian safety. And so, would like to
So the problem is, the common statement for this weekend will be, how do we make Houston streets safer for pedestrians, given that we are primarily the driving city? So Houston has one of the highest rates of personal car ownership. And we also have one of the highest vehicle miles traveled. So people are driving everywhere. But everybody also has to walk. Either if you're walking to your parking space, if you're walking from transit to where you need to go, if you're walking to the coffee shop, you are a pedestrian. And did anyone walk here this morning from, oh yeah, we got some pedestrians, great. So this is, people are no match for 2,000, 3,000 pound hunks of metal going 6 miles an hour. There are things on our intersection design, speed, distractions that really lead to people getting into accidents, hitting pedestrians. You know that the state of Texas is actually a yield pedestrian state, which means that if there is a pedestrian that's looking to cross the road, that pedestrian has the right to, and you're supposed to yield to that pedestrian. I actually didn't know that, that it was that big of an issue until we started doing the Vision Zero challenge, because as a pedestrian downtown, certainly I don't see anybody yielding to me when I'm trying to cross the road. So, and I know that all of you have had that experience as well. It's something that is really an issue for the safety of pedestrians. But look at that problem statement, really hone in to this and the purpose of what we're trying to get to. Think of the times that you've been in a situation where you felt unsafe as a pedestrian or as a driver and almost hit a pedestrian. So just really test that, and I think we're going to go to the next stage.
Why city chose the
I mean, you have it in the slide here, which was, while we have such it only comprises about 2% of our total crashes, it is still such an issue in terms of fatalities. It's something that we think is discrete, that we can get usable solutions for over a weekend from the community, thinking of it from different perspectives. It's something that we all feel, and we're all subject matter experts in walking through the city, and so that's something that we really thought would be a good focus area for this weekend. But really, that's why it is just a tremendous problem. We want to figure out a solution for it.
So out of the data that we have seen so far, and in some short time, we are going to be having a panel discussion. We would want you guys to read through some of the stuff that we have shared online. And if you have not received this online link, we have some printed copies, and we can use that to go through the document and then start thinking about it. Start thinking about what questions come to your mind, discuss it with your team members, and see what kind of questions you want to ask from the panel.
Okay, let me give you all a little more context, because we're getting a lot of questions. So the purpose of this time is to give you a few minutes to review some background information and gain a little more knowledge, some more perspective, get familiar with some sources of information. So that's what's in the packet and online, if you're looking at it online. We're not asking you to actually start working on anything right now. Okay, we're going to be walking you through a process to do that. So this time is, unless you walked in the room as an expert on Houston traffic, this time is to give you a chance to learn a little bit about what data are out there and a little background about the problem. So take a few minutes to scan through it, get familiar with what's in there, and then we'll be using this as we move forward as a group.
Thank you. I have let me run through the shared package that we have uploaded so that you guys can get an idea of what is there. On the shared folder, you get all these documents. I know many of you guys have got your computers, so share it with people who do not have, and try to see the things that, the other things that will come useful to you will be this all paper data. This is a lot of data, and this is the data where I got those results from. So, and this has all the publicly available data on crash that happens, locations and everything. If you want to find some patterns related to that question, try to prepare yourself because the panel discussion will be very intense and you will not be able to get a lot of time after that to prepare your questions. So this is the time you can use to go through the data and prepare yourself. You have a few more things that you should see. There is a draft sheet for the regional safety plans. What is happening over there? We have a lot of information. Please go through this. Not everything can be printed. That's the reason we wanted you to read on your computer. And go through this if you have anything coming up for you to ask questions. This is on the shared drive. So it was sent to all the participants who registered through Women Drive, but we can call you again. Yes. But we will help you to get that. Everyone, while you're reading the documents, just write down the top questions that come into your mind, and then you can brainstorm it. So write all the questions that comes into your mind, and then based on the teaching that I received.
I have a pen actually. Oh, piece of paper, I got it. multiple on the charger. So I'm talking about just running it. It'd be interesting to see if this integrates that into their
you are in 2 minutes.
Excellent. Hey, we have a special treat today. We have Council Member David Robinson, who is our at-large 2 council member, representing the Dopes, which is all of City of Houston. He's one of 5 council members that represents the entire city. So he represents you if you're a City of Houston resident. Also over the Technology and Transportation and Technology and Infrastructure Committee, chairing that committee. The city's representative to Houston Galveston Area Council, which is a really big regional council of governments. They're the ones who have all the money to fund all of this really important transportation safety work. So without further ado, Councilmember Robinson, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Good morning, everybody. How are you? Okay, so I'm Councilmember Robinson. Call me David. I am, as Jesse has just announced, an at-large council member. So every square inch of our tremendously big city, 640 square miles. If you're not familiar with the math of the place, Houston, of course, is enormous. We've got 11 districts across our city. And so 11 district council members, that goes E through K. And as Jesse has said, we also have 5 of us who serve in positions 1 through 5 that are at large. So that means every square inch. And so that's wonderful. That's 2.3 million people. And for those of us who need to represent you, that means we need to be good listeners. It also means that in my now 3rd term on city council, that I've spent a great deal of my life now, 7 years as an elected official, and about a decade and a half before that being a public official in various appointed positions and representing neighborhoods. There's something in the city of Houston called the Super Neighborhood Alliance, and I was a super neighborhood president in Montrose, otherwise known as Neartown, and then as part of the Super Neighborhood Alliance, I got to represent Oklahoma City as the president of the Alliance, the Super Neighborhood Alliance. So it's wonderful in my experience, I think, that I've been both a grassroots representative, working with the people in the community. I'm a religious person, so I go to church a lot and spend time with folks that I worship with, but at the same time, feel very at ease going out throughout the city. And similarly, as Jesse has said, and some of the folks who are here leading the session, I do represent the region in the way that it's a COG, a Council of Governments. So that's the city, it's counties. The Houston Galveston Area Council is the COG, otherwise known as an MPO, a Metropolitan Planning Organization. So if you're an MPO or a COG, you do get lots of money to help the region plan for growth. In the case of my role representing you and representing the city of Houston, I've been appointed to something called the Transportation Policy Council. That's the TPC, and we serve in 8 county region. So Harris County, where Houston is at the center and core of that, and attracts a lot of the TxDOT dollars and federal dollars that filter down through federal and state government that come to our region to help plan for growth in categories that relate to transportation, but also to help in planning so that we can anticipate issues that involve all of us and all of our health and all of the region's growing prosperity. So we continue to be a very vibrant, growing city, and if you know the challenge that you're faced with today, thinking about Vision Zero, that's a charge that not only makes sense to us here locally because we know that we have too many pedestrian deaths and accidents, or what we call crashes. Sometimes an accident has been challenged as a concept because it's not so much something that happens like spilling a glass of milk. Because and I am an architect, and I've had my own firm for 20 years, I've been licensed for 25 years, and went to the School of Architecture here at Rice University. With our professional license and experience, we know that design influences how we live or how we die. And sometimes in the case of accidents, those are things that we can anticipate because of the design parameters and what we can measure and see that comes as a result of the design. So what you're faced with today with Vision Zero is really a challenge that not only makes sense to us locally to reduce death, but comes to us as a charge from the state of Texas, the Texas Department of Transportation Commission, which is looking out for us. So our local regional authority from TxDOT is led by our regional director, is a woman named Eliza Paul, who is new to her post and is she's tasked with leading the region, where we also have a commissioner who represents the state government over our region, and her name is Laura Ryan. Laura Ryan has come to us and laid down the gauntlet and said, we must break the trend of having deaths on our roadways. So what you're doing here today is really taking on a real challenge that those of us who are tasked with protecting you, both by our role in city government or by my architecture license to produce buildings and other environments that provide for health, safety, and welfare. That's what we do. That is what our charge and license obliges us to do. So as design professionals, you're here today, whether you're licensed or not or practicing, we're thinking about a real problem that is going into the design of our streetscape. And you're at a really very interesting part of town. Jesse and I were just talking about the outside environment. So you're here over a 2-day period to take into account some really practical things about how we design streets. Sometimes we want a street that has what some engineers call throughput, and we're thinking about volume and speed and getting people out of congested and getting them on down the road. Well, frequently in the city, we're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to slow people down. We're trying to create safe environments. We use traffic calming devices and think about things that can put roads on a road diet. Thinking about fewer vehicles or ways in which we can increase the pedestrian activity. So you're at a part of town where right over here on Baggy Street, we have the first example of our complete street package, which several years ago when our mayor was in East Harbor, she laid out what was an executive direction for us, a charge to build this street, which is, as one can see, and if you do take a break at some time today, you might just go and walk out on the street and see some of those things that they've done. It's incorporating a number of design techniques that are, in my opinion, very good for urban environments and the landscape of the city, where we can slow people down and increase and encourage people to really think about alternate means of travel. So that's better sidewalks, more pedestrian activities, it's things that can embrace our metros, landscape, the light rail, and buses, and those things that are out there as an alternative to our cars. And things like Uber and Lyft, trying to enhance some of those landscapes. So while you're looking at a street intersection, or walking around, or hearing the panel that's going to talk later, we've got some incredible thought leaders. I'm thinking of Kyle Shelton, my friend from the Kinder Institute. I'm thinking of Jay Crossley, who's in the back, who's been a dear friend over the years, and has really kept those of us who are elected officials under a microscope and testing us to make sure that we're committed to those things that can really change the trajectory of what we do in design. So I'm really, first of all, very grateful that you're here. I'm encouraged by the whole premise. This is the second time I've participated in a design workshop like this, and I am very committed to what you stand for. So on behalf of Mayor Sylvester Turner and my colleagues on Houston City Council, let me first say thank you. And you know, I'm glad to be here. I think my role was to sort of say thanks and welcome, and also to be here if I can answer any questions. And I think with that, I'd like to request that you give yourselves a round of applause.
Robinson, a round of applause too, please. Councilmember Robinson, you know, we can't have favorites on council as in the mayor's office, but you're certainly one of the most innovative council members there is and has been. So I'd like to thank you for that and for all that you do
quiero decir alguna cosa más, y es, si hay personas aquí que no hablan inglés, hay algunas personas en la ciudad que pueden charlar con ustedes y discutir algunas cosas sobre transportación en la ciudad. We're in this together, so way to go, and once again, glad to be here.
So next up is the expertise panel discussion. We will have just a panel discussion session. We will be using it to that. We will give just
Come here. We can't hear you.
So the next step is the panel discussion. We will have 4 panels here. They will Jesse will be moderating the panel, and you will get to hear some moderated questions. And after that, you will get to ask your own questions from the panels. So it's going to be pretty intense. Next 4 panels to 1 hour. If you want to take a quick break, we can take it, and then we'll start the panel. Meanwhile, we need some time to set up.
Can we back at 11? Is that correct?
Yes. So what's the time it is right now?
We got 10 minutes for a break. Everybody back by
Yes.
11 o'clock.
We'll start the panel at 11. So in between, you want to take a break, stand up, or whatever. We'll start at 11.
His 80th birthday coming up. Yeah, like 7th. You want to say hi? See him in the pigeon. Yeah. Tell him how to go. Oh. Awesome.
I'm saying,
Yeah.
I'm freak, yeah.
Thanks for being part of this.
Hey, what's up, man? Good.
I have a question just for you. That is the office of the Oh yeah, and also back and forth. Theory, pharmaceuticals, nonprofit work across the state. So, and there's been a lot of yeah, well, so we did do a technical project for and basically it's doing 2 things. It's trying to get images and help solve last year. I think lived in 2 cities, 12 added 8 cities.
Good morning, my name is David Robinson. I'm city council member from the city of Houston. I serve that large position. Here today, working with the DFE Vision Zero. A very challenge for us.
But that's like
downtown
road
where we are today. And also the region
did that line.
southeastern Texas.
But that's our road.
I'm very excited about the challenges that we're facing here today. That's a very unique design. Create safer, talk about transportation modalities and ways in which we encourage shared ridership, encourage sports, utilize metro, like rail, bus service, and the driver professionals, which that's how we could design modalities. So this is all very exciting to me. Very important. Has enthusiasm. Grateful for all this. Once again, David Robinson, representing the city. Colleagues.
Right here.
Where did you guys end up?
The Head Mall. So, we actually finally just bought the house. Where it is. Just in Austin. And the only, the cheapest things that people can find of any type. There's my neighbor just told me, I actually just met the guy who owns the house behind us, who doesn't live there anymore. He bought it, or he's lived there for a while, he bought it in 2007 for $170,000. Jesus, really?
We have friends about
That's changed.
we have friends about most people.
Right.
And then we all of a sudden were insane. Kudos to you. We all were insane for about 6 months.
Which that's the whole. He's saying we're spending time on land development code fight there. It's amazing how effective engineering zoning is at benefiting the homeowners. Yes, they are passed things.
And that's, I said that.
All the elections are not like that. It's the land development. They passed this they also are big done two. It's passed twice. So there'll be one more in a couple weeks. It might be a more of a fight. I mean, the very big picture is the estimated total housing capacity right now is like 150,000 units over 10 years. And council direction last summer was like, we need to get 405,000. Like dramatically reduced capacity. And then they go back down. So, yeah, so allowing one in certain places. So we'll fight. Whether or not it's there's a whole reason the urban people just hate NIMBYs and segregation. And they're like, screw you everywhere. You're like, oh, fourplexes everywhere. That whole, like Minneapolis. So they're fascists. But then the argument the mayor wanted, it's just like allow whatever along your main streets. they have centers, corridors, transit corridors. So it's sort of a mixing bag. But it's under some, yeah. So and I don't think it's like draft one of the right. The other two. I think there will be some.
I'm going to agree with
You're gonna need
Where am I doing it? Fourth?
live stream. Yeah, it's not. You need to come back. So go further away. You're good. It's a little tough. How do you want to do
Hey everyone, can we settle down a little bit? we got a lot of great conversation going on. Let's put a pin in it for a moment. I'm getting a ton of really good questions, and to the answers I don't know, so that is what this panel up here is for today. We have assembled an all-star panel of representatives from city, from the state, from academia, to really give us a good sense of the problem. And we know what the problem is. It's that we're focusing on at least today, which is pedestrian safety. That's one aspect of the whole Vision Zero initiative amongst many others, as we discussed earlier. But we're really going to dive deep into pedestrian safety and talk about Vision Zero from the perspective of what the problem is, what is currently being done about it, what the strategies we're undertaking in order to make our streets safer. With that, I'd like to introduce the panel here. So first we have Kyle Shelton, who is the Deputy Director of Rice Kinder Institute. Rice Kinder is the research think and do tank for the city. Kyle has written a book called Power Moves. He's a biker and pedestrian himself, likes to work every day. Mike here has done a lot of research on near misses and just pedestrian safety in Houston. So I'd like to just everyone give him a round of applause. Next up, we have Lauren Grove, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves also through this, but I'll give them a little introduction first. So Lauren, actually, she's a neuroscience. She graduated from University of Michigan with a neuroscience degree, and then went on to graduate with a master's in urban planning. So she knows both the behavior and the issues that are affecting cities. The design aspect of it. She's in the planning department as a transportation planner. She's spearheading the Vision Zero task force and a lot of the efforts that we're doing around Vision Zero in Houston. So welcome, Lauren. And then we got Sharon Moses Burnside, who is a wonderful addition to the panel. Thanks for being the last minute to do it. So Sharon is over the transportation planning group in the planning department of the city of Houston. She's a JD, a lawyer who has done a lot with transportation policy development, and we're just thrilled to have you here, Sharon. So everybody give her a round of applause. And then finally, we got Jay Crossley, who is with Farm and City, which is a rural and urban think tank, basically a nonprofit advocacy group based out of Austin that's spearheading the Vision Zero Texas effort. So he's really going to talk about this from the state of Houston's perspective. But he just recently moved to Austin. He's actually been in Houston. He was the director of Houston Tomorrow, which was a local organization here that's looking at ways to make the city more innovative and future ready. So anyway, let's give Jay a round of applause as well. Well, good. Well, so I guess we don't need to do an introduction now. I would like, if y'all could, just give a little bit about your background and your perspectives at a high level about, what you're researching or what your role in Vision Zero is. Just if you could, yeah.
Well, good morning, everybody. As Jesse said, I'm Kyle Shelton from the Kinder Institute. I am a representative on the Vision Zero Task Force, or the Vision Zero Task Force. There's only one. And then the Kinder Institute has looked at transportation and design of cities, mainly Houston, and mainly applying our research to the Houston region now we're in our 10th year, and have been really focused on the urban environment and space for the last 5 or so of that. We've just next week a second round report about the Near North Side and its neighborhood experiences, resident experiences, and the status of its pedestrian and street infrastructure will come out. So that'll be the second of our series in complete community studies, where we talked to more than 300 residents of the Near North Side to get their perspectives of how they experience their streets, which places they like to walk to or don't like to walk to, why, what they, how they encounter a busy street, what's the difference between neighborhood street, and then tie that to an actual audit of the sidewalks and the infrastructure. So we do studies like that, and hope to continue to do more, and also think about bigger picture questions about how we design a region that works better.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Grove. I'm a transportation planner in the planning department, as Jesse mentioned. I've been in Houston for 2 years and been in this role for 2 years, moving from Michigan. Came here for the job because I really wanted a challenge when it comes to transportation. And that has certainly been the case, but it's been a really great opportunity to think broadly about how people move around Houston and mostly driving culture. So how do we start to shift and provide transportation options for everybody, knowing that not everyone can afford a car or just wants to choose other ways to get around. So I've been working directly on Vision Zero for the last year and a half, and really just learning about what is Vision Zero, what is it going to take, collaborating with other city departments, which is a really big key component of Vision Zero, is that collaboration, multidisciplinary effort, and working with other agencies in Houston, knowing that it's not just a city effort, it's going to take everyone to make our streets safer. And so that's really been the role of the planning department, is sort of convening and facilitating how do we develop a really successful strategy, and how do we think about this in the long term, because it doesn't happen overnight. How do we start to shift mobility in the long term and make it safer for everyone on the roadways? So with that, I'll share.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Jesse, for the invitation. It's great to see the crowd of faces out there. I'm Sharon Moses Burnside, and as Jesse stated, I'm an attorney. I went to law school, I did my law degree, but after I graduated from law school, I went back to get my master's in transportation planning and management, because to me, transportation was so important. Policy issues are what drive me. I oversee the management department division for the transportation planning development department. Lauren and I work together very closely. She's on my team, and she is a jewel. Lauren got there a little bit before I did. I've only been in this division now for a little less than 2 years, but Lauren has made it all happen. She actually became the Rookie of the Year. I should be talking about myself, but I have to talk about Lauren. She was nominated for Rookie of the Year because Lauren had the mayor to sign the executive order for Vision Zero, right? So in my big vision and viewpoint of Lauren, she has effectuated to change policy for the city of Houston. That's huge for a rookie. So with that being stated, I'm overseeing the transportation division. I look over the complete streets policy. I'm working closely with Lauren in the subcommittee communications part, because I like to talk a lot. It's kind of what I do. But it's exciting to be a part of Houston's changing paradigm shift in transportation. We're all connected to Vision Zero. Even if you're not on this panel, you matter. And this is why we're all here, to make a difference in Houston. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks everybody, and I hope this makes sense and will be not too long. But so as I said, I work for a nonprofit called Houston Tomorrow, a 501c3 for 10 years in Houston, working on transit, on legalizing walkable urbanism, and on complete streets and things. And now I work for a statewide nonprofit, because to some extent, one, I never convinced my wife Houston was okay, because we met in Austin, and then two, everything we did in Houston was sort of butted up against the ceiling of state policy, and that it was an exciting opportunity to go say, we need to change these things statewide. But back here, there's a long series of things. The Complete Streets movement, as Councilmember Robinson said, actually started back in 2011 at Free Press Summerfest, and we had a petition for safer streets. And that eventually worked, and we started changing things. There's a whole bunch, even the transit movement in Houston goes further back, and even the walkable urbanism, even the designing better walkable places is part of Vision Zero. And there's a long history there of change, and we're building upon a lot of good work. And for example, the City of Houston design manual was dramatically changed back in 2015. Basically meaning the rule book that you can use as designers to design streets was changed in a way to allow for safer, better streets. And then across the state, we successfully pushed TxDOT to adopt a Road to Zero last year, and to adopt a system safety approach and the double safety funding, adding $300 billion a year for safety. And in the same time last year, there were 2 governments at the beginning of the year that had, in Texas, that had Vision Zero. And we got to, by the end of the year, 12 governments. And we're hoping to keep moving exponentially up on that. And so my whole point on this is that this is a long time coming. And I think the people of Texas and of Houston have wanted this change and this paradigm shift. but now we're really ready to do it and substantially change the face of our streets and our neighborhoods. And we need you guys to figure out how to do it and do it quickly. And the ground is fertile for this change now. So let's do it.
Excellent, yeah. Yeah, so this is a question for all the panel. You know, we talk about pedestrian safety as being an issue, and the problem statement we're focused on is pedestrian safety. We realize that we've talked about the fact that only comprises about 2% of total crashes, but about 26% or so of the total fatalities on our streets, so that Houston has some of the deadliest roads in the country. And so I wanted to open this up to the panelists. What are the factors that make Houston uniquely bad in that regard, or have it as a uniquely troubling issue for the city of Houston?
Well, maybe I'll just stick and let other people say other things, but speed is a huge issue. And that walking is generally not a dangerous activity. But the fast, large mass vehicles are the dangerous thing. And we have made mistakes across our country for 50 years and have designed things for high speeds, and that was a terrible mistake. And all of the national acronyms, the AASHTO is the state transportation entity, NACTO is the city transportation entity, the Government Highway Safety Administration, the NTSB, the NSC, all of them have put out reports in the last several years saying, we've made terrible mistakes, you guys. And the whole idea of speeding things up didn't work. And people are trapped. It takes longer to get where you need to go than it did in the past. And it's killing you. And so that the primary problem for pedestrians in Houston is the speed of large mass vehicles. And we have to figure out how to change that.
Thank you, Jay. I'm going to follow the mayor's lead on this one, that we do have our challenges in the city of Houston, but Houston is a city of solutions. And we're working toward that right now. When we look at the big picture, we're in systems level planning, Lauren and I, for the planning and development department. If we want to say we have problems, sure. Houston has been designed, we're a big state, we like land, we like the distance in between our houses. So we're designed a little bit differently. But we're currently looking at how we design our city streets. And we're working on the solutions to some of these issues and some of these concerns. So while these numbers matter, and we focus on the numbers because we have to see the numbers, we're also looking right now currently at how do we correct that? How do we make this different? How do we make this city better for the pedestrians, for the people that live here, for the more walkable places, for the cyclists? And that's what we're currently working on. We've got the Houston Bike Plan, the bicycle plan, where we're trying to make a bicycle network throughout the city. And these are the things that we're focusing on to make Houston better. We've got our challenges, but we're working on solutions.
So just to build on the speed component, I would say another challenge for pedestrian safety are at the intersections and mid-block crossings. So just crossing the street in general. We're faced a lot with always being on watch as a pedestrian, because even if you have the signals, oftentimes it feels like you don't know what that car might do at the intersection, as well as just trying to cross our very wide streets. And so that, I think, is a big challenge and might not be unique to Houston. I think a lot of cities are dealing with this, but I think it's a bigger challenge here.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's not, we're not all that unusual, unfortunately, at least for Sunbelt cities. So, it's terrible to walk in Phoenix. Anybody try to walk in Phoenix? It's not just that it's 118 degrees. It just is just as unsafe there because the entire city is built for cars. Tucson, where my wife's grandma lives, they have 9-lane boulevards, and you watch people with a stroller try to cross on the main intersections, and it's just it is a game of soccer even when they have the green light. And I also think this is again not just Houston and not just Texas, but the kind of the car culture, but also just all of our perspectives about who gets to use our streets and who's sort of supposed to use our streets. When it is only sort of what's the most share of pedestrians? Probably 2 or 3%, right? A very small proportion of it. It's hard to sort of recognize those users as a respected part of the system, right? And for folks who only drive, it's sort of seen as an aggravation, right? Like, oh, that biker is in my way. Why are they even on this street? Like, what's happening? And you don't see those bikers enough. And I think that also translates into things like, who knew that you were supposed to yield for pedestrians in crosswalks? It's the law. Like, you're supposed to stop. If I step into a crosswalk, not at a stoplight, you're supposed to stop for me in Houston, Texas. No one does that. No one enforces it, and it's just an expectation that pedestrians will wait for cars. And in many other places, that's not true. Like, I had to stop my dad from walking across a crosswalk. He saw a car like 100 feet away, and he was like, okay, great. That car's clearly gonna stop. And I was like, nope, you're gonna stay here. And the car went through about 30 miles an hour. And again, that's not unique to Houston, but we have elements that are things that we can build on, and we know lots of the issues around speed and how our roads are designed for even faster than what the speed limits are, right? I think that's another piece that I always like to highlight. I think it's most of the local streets, the speed limits are 30 miles an hour, but they're designed for 40 to 50 miles an hour. Like, as a driver, you feel safe driving that speed because of the way the roads are engineered, and that's insane. So we're saying it's like actually opposed to what we're saying in the law, is we're putting a speed limit up that says only drive this speed, but we've made a road where you're going to feel perfectly comfortable breaking the law we've installed to say drive slower. And again, that's not just Houston, that's so there's a lot of commonalities there, some things that I think are absolutely unique to Houston. But there's also a lot in why the Vision Zero movement nationally is so powerful, is that you can kind of talk about all of them.
Yeah, we had a bunch of questions earlier that I was unable to answer that kind of really are trying to figure out what the face of this problem looks like. What are the conditions? I know that we're doing a lot of analysis right now, and that Kyle, you've done a lot of analysis with near misses and whatnot, but who are the people that are impacted by pedestrian safety? What are the contexts that they're in, the environments? Can you just kind of talk at a high level, maybe it's anecdotal now, but a high level about what type of situation are pedestrians in that is leading to it?
I just very briefly say it's all of us, right? Because every trip starts with pedestrian, and then other folks probably know more of the deep statistics than I do, but I just say like folks who are taking transit are amongst the most vulnerable because they're trying to get to the transit sites, they're trying to cross these neighborhoods with big boulevards. People who are without cars, right, where their choices are only to get to transit or to walk to their destinations, are put into situations where the infrastructure is not prepared for them. And so it's but I
time of day, is time of day an issue, or weather conditions? You know, that's the type of questions that we have coming out.
Well, I guess, yeah. So there are time of day things. There's City of Boston has amazing data looking at everyone who's died and when they died, and like I think it's like 9 o'clock to mid, or like 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Is the most dangerous because of our rampant, horrible drug driving problems across Texas. 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. A lot of people are dying. But I was going to say that nationally, there's lots of studies about how people of color are more likely to be killed as a pedestrian. Elderly people are more likely to be killed as a pedestrian. And we did a thing a while ago back in Houston. There was the people-powered bike ped count. And we just had 100 people go out and count how many people were walking or biking. And they also counted how many people were driving. And one of the things you can see clearly from the data is the income level of the zip code you're in. The lower income levels, you'd see more people walking and biking. And so the idea that Houston is generally, all of Houston, if you live in River Oaks, it's terribly dangerous to walk. And if you live in the poor neighborhood, it's fairly dangerous to walk. It's dangerous everywhere to walk. But the people in the poor neighborhoods are walking more, and thus are more at risk of our terrible walking situation.
I just want to make it a general thing. I know that there are specifics to it, and we're crunching numbers. But look around you. Like, look, oh, hi, how are you? So, look at your neighbor. I mean, this issue of safety affects all of us. So when you say who, I know we didn't have specifics and we can go to local communities and we can talk about equity issues. But Vision Zero is about all of us, right? We're all at risk if we're talking about safety issues and pedestrian safety and cyclists and whatever mode you choose to get around in. So I want to make sure that we look at that not only from the specifics, but just from everyday life. Lauren is cycling all over the city. I'm always concerned about Lauren. Lauren's trying to tell me to get on my e-bike. I'm scared. Why? Because of issues of safety along our city streets. So we're all, I guess, directly focused or directly impacted by that. And I just want to make sure that when we look at specifics, we're also keeping it very general, because your mom, your dad, if they're walking or using our city streets, we're talking about them. And that's why we're here.
Let's talk about strategies here. So everyone has a research packet that goes through the 5 E's for traffic safety and for Vision Zero, rather. Evaluation and planning, engineering, enforcement, education, equity. So I wanted to kind of deep dive into each one of those areas, and maybe Lauren, if you could start by just talking about what are we doing in terms of evaluation and planning, what's succeeded, what's failed, and what's going to get us to zero.
So when we think of evaluation, oftentimes we think of how can we use data when it comes to planning, when it comes to design, when it comes to developing countermeasures. And so a lot of evaluation will be, what does it look like right now? What are the existing conditions in Houston in terms of how many people are dying on our roadways? Where are those crashes occurring mostly? And what does that context look like? What does that street look like? What does the neighborhood look like? What is the land use? So we oftentimes do a before picture, and then we think about how can we make an improvement and see how that improvement is working after. So what does that after picture look like? How is this really impacting the safety? How is it reducing crashes? And what can be adjusted if it's not working? So I think that's a big part of evaluation, and that helps us to plan for the next step. And I think specifically for Houston with Vision Zero, where we're at is developing an action plan by September of this year. And so when Kyle mentioned being part of the task force, Jay is also on the task force, everybody's on the task force. We're really gathering data. We're in the process of thinking about what are going to be our guiding principles for Vision Zero. The 5 E's are a part of that picture, but really for Houston, what is going to guide the strategy? What are the unique challenges for Houston that Vision Zero is going to tackle? And that's the process we're in right now. So maybe you will be hearing about it, hopefully, especially when the action plan is complete in 2020, but this is sort of an open call that we really are in the meat of developing something that will hopefully be part of our longer term commitment to street safety.
And maybe Sharon, can you take on engineering and what system design and how can our streets be designed to be safer?
Okay, so I'm cutting Jesse off because I'm not an engineer. I'm actually sitting in place for Ian. Couldn't make it today from Houston Public Works. So let me say this. When we talk about systems level planning, for the city of Houston's aspect in the transportation division, we talk about complete streets. We're talking about more walkable spaces. So I can't speak as an engineer, but I can speak as system level design. If we look at our streets and we begin to design our streets in a way where we're talking about the human element, which is what the city of Houston is looking into with Vision Zero. That's what Vision Zero is about. Considering the fact that we are going to make mistakes. Right? So instead of designing the streets where we're focusing on just the traffic and the cars getting from A to B, we get it where we design it where people are the first thought. When we design the streets for people, where we have more walkable spaces, wider crosswalks, better connectivity, then we're talking about Vision Zero. Then we're making a difference in the city of Houston. Complete Streets is a design for that. We mentioned the idea. And now that's changed. We're looking at our design manual. We're changing that to be inclusive of the bicycles and making sure that we have proper bicycle facilities. We used to just put bicycles if we did a few on the road. Right now, we have a minimum amount of space. 5 feet is the minimum for your standard design for a bicycle facility. Just a bicycle lane, we call them facilities. Or if you're connecting it to a major thoroughfare, then you've got to make it for 6 feet. So these are the types of things that we're looking at. And again, it's not going to happen overnight. But when we talk about having a complete streets, we're talking about our IDM, which is our infrastructure design manual. All of these things are connecting to be under the umbrella of Vision Zero, our Houston Bike Plan. We're talking about a resilient Houston, making Houston more resilient. All these things are connected to eventually come together to make the city of Houston more walkable, more user-friendly for all modes so that we can all share the road. So we're changing the way we design slowly and maybe incrementally, but that's how it's being done. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. And Kyle, let's talk about enforcement. You were talking earlier about Texas as a failure to yield or a yield to pedestrian state. We don't see many citations being written for failure to yield as an example.
Yeah, so enforcement is kind of not, they're all tricky and they're all complicated, but enforcement as corrective action is rarely the most successful strategy, right? So enforcement, in my mind, actually needs to tie into the education side a lot. And we actually had a really interesting conversation with the HPD representative to the task force 2 meetings ago, where we talked about, and we were talking about the failure to yield law. And an example of the types of stuff you can do are thinking about it almost as like a pilot or awareness activity where you're not going to ticket everyone that you're pulling over, but you are going to pull people over. And you're going to make it, you could announce it 2 weeks ahead of time. You could say at this intersection, from this date to this date, we will pull you over if you fail to yield. You could put up a huge text crawler and say this is the law. Any car that does not do this is going to get pulled over. I don't care. You can tell everybody. The HPD could put it on their Twitter. The mayor could talk about it. You could have it be as public as you want. People are still going to fail to yield, and they're still going to get pulled over. And if you're driving and you're saying, oh man, I'm late, I'm going to go, I don't really care what that pedestrian's doing, then you get pulled over and you're 10 minutes late, even if you don't get a ticket, even if it's just a police officer coming up and saying, excuse me, we posted this for the last week, you still broke this rule. We just wanted to remind you of that, and next week, we are going to ticket. So just remember that this is the case. People are still going to get angry about that. People get cranky all the time. I am endlessly impressed by people's ability to get angry about breaking laws and then being cranky about the fact that they broke the law and getting punished for that. Why they exist.
In Texas in particular, I mean, we have Houston, especially. We have red light cameras.
Yeah, that's the other example I was going to touch on, and it's so. I mean, again, it's kind of a perspective thing, but like I come from the perspective of our motivation should be to keep people alive and safe. Like, I hope everyone would agree that my life and my children's life when I'm on our cargo bike going through an intersection is more important than you saving 30 seconds by going through a yellow light or a red light and killing me. Because you will kill me. If you run a red light and hit a biker, you're going to kill me. Because you're going 40 miles an hour, you're in your giant truck, you're probably like above my head with the front of your fender, I'm going to die. And so a red light camera, like, yeah, we can debate that and we can talk about some of the challenges that come from that. And there's research that shows like fender benders happen more when there are red lights. Again, I would argue occasional fender benders better than T-bone accidents that leave everyone dead. And that's also about education and enforcement, and they have to go together because you can't just tomorrow say, hey, we have red light cameras. If you run a red light, you're getting a $1,000 ticket. Such to be you. You have to say, we're doing this for this reason. We're going to start enforcing it at this time. Like, it's going to happen, and it's not about bringing in revenue. It's about keeping people alive, and that's why we're going to do all these things. So to me, enforcement has to be tied into all those other pieces, and it has to be a process. You have to be aware and willing to say, we're going to bring people along, because that's how you change the actual culture. It's not just a one-time, like, everything's fixed now, we're going to write you a ticket. Because we also don't have the capacity to write all those tickets. We have to help change, and the infrastructure piece of that is huge.
And that's a perfect segue into Jay. I mean, talk to us about education and encouragement, the last 2 E's, and aside from the enforcement piece, how do we educate people to be safer about the way that they use sidewalks or walk around the city, and also drivers to be more educated about all the laws that we have?
Well, I think I'd sort of give two answers, and one is that we've been, part of the Vision Zero movement is empowering family members, and we have a group in Austin called the Central Texas Families for Safe Streets, and there's some discussion trying to start a Houston group, and the traffic violence is horrible, and people are going through, like basically the worst thing that's ever happened, unexpected tragic events. And we need in our society to hear those voices and to hear those stories. And we need to talk about it differently. And one angle on this is we need police officers and EMS to share, like there's been a general sense that police and EMS don't talk about how horrible their jobs are at times when they show up at these crashes. We need to make space to hear those stories because it's happening every day. And part of that is changing the way we talk about things. And so there's a crash not accident movement. You can leave crashnotaccident.com, sign the pledge. They're not accidents, they're crashes. An accident implies that it just was gonna happen. And so many of us work very hard to get the media to understand the way, there's even some great research out of Texas A&M that the way media stories cover traffic crashes impacts people's perception of policy and like whether or not they support a horrible choice like banning red light cameras, and how they act. And it actually, like the way media talks about crashes impacts how we all act in the system. And so there's, in all kind of levels, we have to talk differently about this. Including like we shouldn't talk about drivers or pedestrians. All of us should have safe access to get to places however we want. And we shouldn't identify as drivers. It's a real problem. And then the other side of it is we really need to actually have a paradigm shift, and we need to change our physical reality. And we were talking about how you feel uncomfortable driving at a safe speed on those streets in Texas. And so you guys, if you paint purple crosswalks and put up 15-foot chickens and change the physical reality to signal that you're in a place where there will be humans walking around and that you're not in an efficient tunnel trying to move widgets as quickly as possible. And so part of the education is changing our physical reality. And I think that's where we have tremendous opportunity to, on the cheap, really change every neighborhood in Houston to look like a place where you should be able to get around safely. And if you are driving, you should be driving safely to not hurt people.
And Jay, I mean, you come at it from that statewide perspective, and you were mentioning earlier that there are like 12 or so governments in the Texas region that have gone through this Vision Zero process or are going through it. Can you talk about what are some notable things that they're discovering through their research, and maybe or have strategies that they've implemented that are succeeding, or just some notable things from those other cities?
Yeah, well, so 10 of those governments happened last year, and they're just getting started, just like you said. But San Antonio and Austin have been doing this for 3 or 4 years. And the most significant thing that both of them have done is to learn. And the cities themselves have collected data and knowledge about what works in ways that really no other governments in Texas kind of have at this time. And so there's things like that Houston is rapidly catching up. And so things like a frequent injury network, so it's called, that basically in most cities, something like 10% of the roadway network, most of your deaths are happening. And so the city of Austin knows that and has been actually focusing resources and police time and funding for fixes in the places where most people are dying. And so that kind of knowledge, all the other 950 cities in Texas don't have that knowledge. And if they're spending sidewalk money, they're not spending it efficiently, they're not putting it where they get the most bang for the buck. And so that's one of the best things I think that San Antonio and Austin have, is a much better understanding of how to use money wisely to improve everybody's lives. And then it's all about, I think, these physical change, and that both San Antonio and Austin have done these incremental, testing things out, and using the little plastic things you use to make bike lanes, but using them to totally change the design of an intersection. And maybe you can test it out and see how it works. And the people driving or walking or biking in Austin or San Antonio, people have gotten used to new looking things. And so I think that's an important part as we now shift basically every street in Texas.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. And I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions. I know you'll have a bunch of really good questions earlier. Does anyone have anything? Marie, back and back.
So one question I have is, you mentioned, or someone had mentioned, that a lot of the accidents are happening at crosswalks. Are we seeing most accidents where people are turning or going straight? Did you get that?
So Jesse's referenced a couple of studies that we did, so this is just a very small sample size, and I think, you know, the different factors of nighttime and the road you're on and all that, everything changes, but we had about 200 people respond to a near-miss survey, and if I'm recalling correctly, apologize if I am off a little bit because it's a 2-year-old study now, but the top 3 were almost all turns, right? So it's either left turn, cars taking left turns across intersections, the kind of quick right turn, often at a red light. Ongoing message here, people who are not stopping and rolling through red lights at about 15 miles an hour. And then I believe the third one is like the equivalent of backing out or pulling into driveways, or whether it's a business or a home, like that's another case where there are lots of pedestrians. Obviously that's different for vehicles, but again, that was just from our small study. I think those are amongst the most common types of crashes in general.
Just add one thought to that, and I don't think this is unique to Austin, but the data, I know the data from Austin very well, is that most pedestrian deaths are a pedestrian somewhere where they're not supposed to be. And so that's mid-block crossings or running across a freeway. And so, one, it's sort of crazy to run across a freeway, but, and there's a lot of, like, a long history of police sort of doing victim blaming in the media and saying, well, they were in the wrong place. And we need to look at it differently and say, why have we designed places for humans to live where humans every day, all the time, are tempted to dash across a dangerous street? And so either we need to put a safe crossing in there or we need to solve that. But I think a lot of pedestrian deaths are pedestrians in places they're not supposed to be. And so we shouldn't have places like that.
Yeah, we actually had that last night. Somebody crossing the East Freeway got run over. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Hi. So my question is about boundaries as it relates to like increase in speed and also using art to make the driving experience more pleasurable. So just as a driver who's extremely anxious, I noticed that music is something that helps. Also with the dry side, whenever the driver is and so I wonder if are there studies or stats to statistically take a look at that, or is that also something you guys as experts have brought us for?
Well, I'll just jump in there. There is a lot of science that basically, if there's interesting stuff, with people being the number one, if there are a lot of people that you can see around, everyone drives slower. But then trees, people drive slower if there are trees near the street, but really anything. And so I always say the 15-foot red chicken. And actually used to say that we should put one right there, because when we first did this complete street, they didn't have the stop sign over there, and people would come off the freeway going 65 miles an hour and sort of like slam to a stop at the light a couple blocks this way. And so I was like, let's just put a giant chicken there so that people everybody would slow down if there's a giant chicken. But now there's a stoplight, that seems a little better, stop sign. But the people, if the context you're in is an interesting place, you're not bored and trying to get out of it as quickly as possible. And there is, I think, significant science on that. And so like the City of Houston's the utility box painting program, I think actually has a little bit of a safety effect. And so I think those are real things. And
I just briefly want to speak to that and pass it to Lauren too. when we talk about complete streets, we're talking about context-sensitive design. So we're talking about designing your street, depending on what's going on in your area. So to speak to that, I think that it would be helpful if we're designing our streets more context-sensitively. And that way, maybe we'll reduce some of the anxiety for drivers and maybe even pedestrians as well.
Just want to give a specific example where art has been really impactful for one of our bikeway projects. So we recently installed a two-way bicycle facility. So it's on one side of the street, but it's wide enough to accommodate people on bikes going one way and the other way in the same space. And it's protected from the vehicle, so it has these plastic delineators. That was very confusing for people driving. They thought it was a specific right turn lane, so they would pull into the bike lane because it was so wide, and they would drive in it. And it happened to be right next to a really cool art studio. And the art studio took it upon themselves to install this really cool, 4 or 5 foot tall installation, and it just said bike, and it's in 3D. And it's right at the intersection, and they said, people don't drive in this anymore. It's very clear, they notice it, it's a draw, and so that's just one example where we can start to think about using art as a way to make our spaces safer.
I just wanted to say, I think that question of anxiety is really interesting for all users again, and whether it's I feel anxious when I drive on our freeways, it's terrifying. They're 10 lanes wide, and I don't know who's coming from over here and over here. But I likewise feel anxious, Brazos by myself on a Saturday morning, right? And I think that goes, to me, that's about the designing of the streets in a holistic way that none of us should feel nervous. If we design them properly, no matter what mode you're taking, you should feel comfortable, and you shouldn't feel like you have to look behind you at every second or be looking in every moment to see who's going to crash into you, or is the choice you're about to make the right choice, or do I need to drive 10 miles an hour faster because the car behind me is tailgating, right? If we can get to a space where we're all less anxious, no matter how we're choosing to move, I think that also means we're in a space where we're all hopefully safer. I would just, the one piece I would say at the beginning is, I'm going to hand it off. I'm just going to come in.
Okay, so is the city committed? Well, let's just say the mayor signed the executive order. That's the beginning, right? There's no money there, but there's a signature. That's the beginning. But is that really the beginning? I would say probably not. The Houston Bike Plan has already started. Then you have to look at the big picture, and that's what we do. I do. We look at the whole big picture. When we had a bicycle challenge from the Harris County Precinct 1 to build 50 miles of high-level bicycle facilities last year, Harris County committed so much money. The city of Houston, the mayor, committed 4.1 or 5.1 million, depending on how you look at where the numbers are, 1.1 million a year for 5 years to help this bicycle plan be implemented. There's money there. So Vision Zero is in the grassroots. We haven't put our money there yet, but we're looking at ways to begin funding this process. The city of Houston is already changing some of the designs of the streets through Houston Public Works. I know the director is looking at, okay, where's the leftover money? Where can we take that money and put it in certain areas? You have to realize that Vision Zero is not an overnight answer. It is a process. Money, in my opinion, is already being implemented in our city streets in the various ways that we're changing the way we do our design. Have we specifically said there's this amount of money for Vision Zero? Not yet. But we are looking at somebody that can come in from the mayor's office and focus on Vision Zero issues. We're looking at a bicycle coordinator from Houston Public Works. All these things tie together to make our streets safer. Because why? We're looking at the big picture for all modalities: pedestrians, bicyclists, people with disabilities. So in that sense, yes, we're talking about adding our money to the pot. Do we have a designated amount for Vision Zero? Not at this time. But if you bring the big picture together, it's all coming together to make our streets safer for all modalities. Where do we begin? Let me talk about this. We had a road safety audit that occurred last year, which we worked with the Federal Highway Authority to designate the 10 most dangerous streets in the city of Houston, right? Intersections. So we looked into that. We've already implemented the low-hanging fruit, as we call it, the things that we could fix without a whole bunch of money. But those things cost money. You talk about labor-intensive issues, where even if it's painting or changing the stripes, we've already done some of that work. That money is being funded to looking at the top most dangerous. We started out with 10. We actually came out with 12, right? I think they came out with 12. We focused on that, and we've already adjusted some of those issues that were low-hanging fruit. So when you look at it from the big picture, the money is being put into systemic, low-hanging fruit issues that we can address. And as this strategy continues to grow and to improve, then I believe that yes, we will begin to put more funding in it. We have to find it. Money's always an issue, but we're always looking. And we're also looking at maybe public-private collaborations, how we can get this done. But being in the grassroots stages, it's a work in progress of kind of building the plane and flying it at the same time. But the fact that you all are here says that we're already in the change process. We're switching the paradigm. And we're looking to you to help us. So if you don't see a dollar amount on there, know that if you look at a big picture, dollars are flowing through the system to change the way we do transportation.
I'm going to try to make several points really quickly to answer what you're saying, to respond to what you're saying. One is that the system we are emerging out of, the old paradigm we're trying to abandon of subsidizing single occupant vehicle use and prioritizing speed in cars is the most expensive option. And both all the governments of Texas spend about $23 billion a year building and maintaining roads, whereas we spend about $2.5 billion a year on transit and several hundred million on sidewalks and things. And so the existing system is wildly expensive and wildly fiscally irresponsible. And a key there is that we all talk about congestion and how much congestion costs us. And one that's never changed. It's about $500 per Texan. It's stayed the same since 1981. But traffic crashes cost significantly more than congestion. And the actual economic impact of crashes is about double congestion. And the comprehensive cost of crashes is about 5 times as much as congestion. It costs Texans about $99 billion a year in pain and suffering and car crashes, whereas congestion costs us about $16 billion a year. And so the current system is terribly wasteful and expensive, and we're just blowing money everywhere. Number two, though, is that even TxDOT, TxDOT in a very good way, has adopted a road to zero, and that's included doubling the amount of money focused on safety. But that $600 million pales in comparison to their $10 billion budget. But they very specifically say every single time is that, we have targeted money for safety interventions that we're using to go fix things. But the rest of the money, all of it also is going, we are learning to make everything safer. And that's what you want. And that's what the City of Houston, the Complete Streets Executive Order requires, that the City of Houston is not allowed to spend money on any street at all, unless it is prioritizing the safety and comfort of all users. And there was a little transition period where staff was like, well, we have all these designs, we can't just throw them away. We are well past that. The City of Houston is not allowed to build anything that doesn't prioritize the safety and comfort of all users. And so, so there is money. There's a lot of money. And we are just going to use it smarter. And then the final thought is that we need the data. We need maps to prioritize how to spend this money. The City of Austin pedestrian plan is a great example where they mapped out every single sidewalk and missing sidewalk in the city, and have a priority list, and it's based on whether people will use it and whether there's density there where people actually be able to walk with it. But it also includes equity measures. And so every dollar the city of Austin spends on sidewalks, they know it's going to the next best place, and we need that here in Houston.
Do we have time for one or
Yes, two more.
Well, just truly Austin, the three sort of main periods of deaths and serious injuries is the drunk hours and then the rush hours. But it makes sense that there are more people out there moving around at rush hours. But that means we need to focus on that. How do we fix that? And clearly, we should stop having socialized freeways. We should have congestion pricing on freeways to get rid of the idea of rush hour. And that we have to fix those things.
I just want to mention our walkable places proposed ordinance that they are preparing now. We don't have direct relation with that, but because it's walkable places, we need the pedestrian moving around, transportation, they're working on that as well. So if they are able to get that implemented, then all of that should help too, when you're talking about time and when they're doing it. If you have more walkable spaces around schools, around different areas, that has to help decrease some of the crashes that are going on. When you look at times and numbers, sure, it all makes a difference. And again, I'm a big picture person. If we have more walkable places citywide, even in the times of days, that should help to reduce some of the crashes that are happening in various areas, particularly around our schools and different locations like that. Okay, I'm going to give this back to Jay, but I want to say this. Again, let me reiterate the fact that we are in the grassroots of Vision Zero, so we're looking at numbers and how different areas in our city are being impacted and where these crashes and stuff are happening. So we're still in the research phases. But I want to talk about equity, because to me, as an African-American woman, equity is a very important issue. I always go back to the Executive Order 12898, which was signed by President Clinton when he was in office about environmental justice. So when you look at our areas where we got low income minorities, sure, we can have a lot of crashes there. And we're looking at the big picture again. When we get our numbers and we look at the top 10 or the top areas where these issues are, then we can address it there. It may turn out that it's a minority area. It may turn out that it's a crosswalk. It may turn out that it's River Oaks and we just didn't do a certain section right. So we have to look at it from that aspect of the top priority issues for the city of Houston. But because of equity issues, we're always looking at that. Equity is a big deal in transportation right now. And from Vision Zero aspect, from transportation position period, minority issues have been historically overlooked. That's why the mayor now has complete communities. And we're looking at areas in the complete communities where transportation issues can be addressed as well. He now has 10 complete communities when he started with 5 last year. We're all connected with that, with complete communities, walkable spaces. What can we do in the areas of transportation in these complete communities? But again, we're still grassroots. We're working hard to make sure that we address equity issues as well. It doesn't answer directly, but I hope it helps.
Well, I was just going to say what she said. The complete communities is very meaningful, and the city has really done great work on really looking at these specific communities and saying, what's wrong here and how can we fix these things? Because the people that live here are citizens of Houston and we should fix their lives. And the only problem with complete communities is there's only 10 neighborhoods right now, and there's 500 or so neighborhoods of that size. I mean, every Houstonian needs safe streets, and it's a very difficult problem to solve. But the Mayor Turner's strategy has been to focus on low-income minority communities, the traditionally underserved communities, and try to fix them and then use them as examples of how we can fix all of our communities. So I think that's good.
Thank you so much.
You can all have the chicken. It's okay.
Yes, so now